all of our emails are on the company system, I promise. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, Scott Walker remains on top of national polls, but with a target on his back. Wisconsin's unemployment rate drops to 5%. Baseball is back, at least in Arizona. The Justice Department clears a Ferguson police officer in shootings of an unarmed teenager. General David Petraeus pleads guilty to a misdemeanor account of mishandling classified information. And speaking of classified documents, Hillary Clinton never used official email systems in her 4 years as Secretary of State. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaks to Congress and a Milwaukee Democrat boycotts. Organizers of a petition campaign designed to stop the downtown streetcar admit defeat and say they will have to start over when the weather warms up. But we start with a marathon legislative session that ends with the passage of right-to-work legislation in Wisconsin.
The poll members recorded their vote. Poll members recorded their vote. If so, the clerk will close the roll. There are 62 ayes, 35 nays.
With that, Wisconsin becomes the 25th state to pass voluntary unionism. The law says that workers can choose to join a union or not without risking their jobs. Union groups and Democrats bitterly opposed the measure, but it was passed easily in the state assembly and now goes to Governor Scott Walker, who will sign it into law as early as tomorrow. Joining me on our panel this morning, defense attorney Dan Adams, former Republican State Representative Michelle Litchens, political strategist Linda Bruin, and communications consultant Brian Fraley. So, Michelle Litchens, you were there for the passage of Act 10. I think the striking thing about last Friday's vote was 62 votes unanimously passed by the Republican caucus. Why 62 votes? How did that happen?
Yeah, and a few days earlier before that,
Right.
we really didn't know we were going to have all of the Republicans support that. But I think there were a few reasons. Number one, they had 24 hours of debate on the bill, where the Democrats rarely debated the merits of the bill at all. But I think that the Republicans heard the arguments and they knew why they were there and they wanted to do the right thing. Number two, Speaker Voss did not harass anyone to vote for this bill. He really said, vote your conscience and vote your district. But number three, and the most important reason, the 4 Republicans that voted against Act 10,
Yes.
all later regretted it, said that they would have changed their vote. They didn't get any credit for it in their district. The teachers' unions didn't support them, and everyone thought they voted for it anyway, so that they would not have gained anything by voting against the Republicans.
Okay, Linda Bruin, I'm not surprised that it passes 62 votes, 62-35, pretty solid margin. What is your big takeaway from looking back at this whole debate?
Well, I think there's been a sea change since Act 10 passed. I mean, when you think about it, 100,000+ demonstrators over Act 10, 3,000 demonstrators for this. And I think, right or wrong, and as you know, I was opposed to this legislation, the state has gone in that conservative movement swing when it comes to unionism and the rights of union workers, et cetera. And the bottom line is that's where not only the legislature is, but apparently most of the public in the state of Wisconsin.
Okay, Brian Fraley.
Yeah, let's not forget, it's great policy, and that's also why 62 people voted for it in the state assembly. It's just been a fantastic week. The Democrats ended their arguments with the minority leader saying, don't listen to anything we said today. It should not affect the way you vote at all. Vote because I don't know why. They were doing nursery rhymes. They were talking about anything but the bill.
Dan Adams.
Well, I was watching the debate this week, and on Friday, John Nygren, who's a Republican from Marinette, came out and said basically, this isn't going to change a whole lot on either way. And he's been to Michigan, he's been to a right-to-work state, and the business leaders up there are saying nothing's really changed.
Well, I think that one of the things that struck me about the debate was how little the opponents of this wanted to actually talk about the merits of the bill. They wanted to talk about everything. They wanted to talk about Act 10. They wanted to talk about infant mortality. They did not want to talk about worker freedom, and that indicated to me pretty much that they were out of ammunition on all of this. But I think really striking about this legislation was number one, the way that this was a legislative initiative. This did not come from Governor Walker. It shows, in fact, that the conservatives in the legislature are not done yet. They still have momentum, and that they're going to continue to be able to push these kinds of things. I also think that what was interesting was the strategy of the opponents of right to work. And I don't mean the left-wing union strategy. The strategy of some of the groups was to hire Republican lobbyists to try to pick off Republican votes. They hired the former Speaker John Gard, former Senator Bob Welch. In the end, they picked off 1 vote out of 2 houses of the legislature. Kind of an epic fail.
Completely. And I think it's important to look at those businesses that were actually saying they were opposed to right to work. Those businesses depend on government contracts, and they have union workers fighting for those wages, and they know that if they have non-union companies fighting for those contracts, they're likely to get those contracts.
Okay, now one of the next big fights is going to be about prevailing wage. How do you stand on prevailing wage laws? Because I know you've dealt with this. Local units of government often will recognize that inflates the cost of public projects. Were you in favor of those?
Well, we really didn't have a choice.
Yeah, right, of course not.
When we were in county government,
Right.
that's the milieu you operated on. And the bottom line for me is going to be, or what I think is going to happen, is that there's going to be the Republican-controlled legislature, and not just in Wisconsin, but in other places, because they saw Act 10 work or get passed, and now right to work is in 25 states. I think that's going to be the next big hurdle that they're going to go after.
I think you're right. And I think one of the ironies, of course, is that Governor Walker did not want this vote, said it was a distraction, but he's going to sign it at Badger Meter tomorrow, and he's going to get all kinds of credit among Republican conservative voters around the country, even though he did not do the heavy lifting. What is your glass half full and what is your glass half empty this week? We'll go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
My glass is half empty because with the warming weather will come lots of Milwaukee potholes. Last year's pothole problem was just incredible. We'll see a repeat. However, my glass is half full because this year there is a new tool to help to combat potholes. The MKE mobile app is a free cell phone app that allows citizens to quickly record and report potholes, graffiti, broken streetlights, and other issues in the city.
Yeah, but they got to fill them in. Michelle Litchens.
My glass is half empty because the state budget may cut $300 million from the UW system. But it's half full because this budget proposal moved UW Stevens Point to announce it must cut its women and gender study classes. Finally, a university cuts real waste.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my glass is half full because last week archaeologists announced the discovery of a mysterious civilization's lost city known as the City of the Monkey God. Explorers have searched for hundreds of years for this fabled city, and now it's been found deep in the Honduran rainforest, in a valley so primeval that the animals had never seen humans before. But my glass is half empty because ranchers who supply American fast food franchises are illegally burning down the rainforest to make room for cattle.
Brian Fraley.
Glass is half full because as of tomorrow, Wisconsin will become a right-to-work state. It's half empty because elimination of the prevailing wage law remains on the to-do list.
Well, my glass is half full because 2 of the owners of the Milwaukee Bucks made the Forbes list of the 400 richest Americans. Is this a great country or what? It's half empty because they still want the public to help pay for their arena. What part of being a billionaire am I missing here? Next on Sunday Inside, Hillary Clinton's private email system for the State Department's business. Is that the same thing as what Scott Walker did when he was county executive? Well, here's the headline that appeared in the newspaper. Walker hits Clinton on private email like he used as county exec. Okay, let's sort this out. When she was Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton never used her official email, government email. Instead, all of her emails went through a private account. That account was traced to a server in her own house. When he was county executive, Walker and his staff also used non-government email accounts on occasion, things like Gmail. But the argument is going to be, well, Walker did the same thing as Hillary, did he?
No, he did not, and it's not even close. Okay, Hillary purposefully circumvented freedom of information laws by storing government documents, government emails on a server inside her house. She didn't have any official government emails. Scott Walker did. It's not even close.
Okay, Dan Adams.
Well, actually, this practice of politicians with their own private accounts, I think is pernicious. There's city council members here in Milwaukee. There's board supervisors here in Milwaukee.
No, but
who
the
do
Secretary of
same
State is running for president of the United States.
She shouldn't have done it, and I'm not going to give her a pass.
Why
on
did
that.
she
I'm not
do
gonna
it?
give
Why did she do it?
Well, who knows? With WikiLeaks, I don't know that the State Department's servers are any more secure.
Oh, that's why.
predictable.
That's
You knew
why.
that was coming.
Yeah.
But listen, this is a practice that just needs to stop. We as citizens should say enough is enough. This is the last time.
Okay.
Yeah, this
Michelle
is
Litchens.
far different than what happened with Scott Walker. She should be held accountable. We should have known this was going on actually years ago. People recognize the email addresses they're sending information to. People should have been aware of this a long time ago.
How big a scandal? How big a scandal? Because there was actually buzz last week about other Democratic candidates that maybe she wouldn't run for president. What do you think?
Unfortunately, I think that the Clintons can get themselves out of any scandal that arises, and I don't think this is going to cause her too much problem.
I don't think this is apples to apples, but there is an issue not only with Clinton, but with multiple members of the GOP hopefuls, including Scott Walker, who've had issues with private email usage. And because of that, most of the other GOP hopefuls have been fairly quiet on this. And it was really Walker's, a staff person in Walker's office, who went after her on this. And of course, that's given rise to what a hypocrite. His own team got arrested. There's felony counts, et cetera, for that. So it's not apples to apples.
The difference is pretty dramatic. Gmail versus her own server. Normally, I would say, look, this is. I mean, first of all, this is the Clintons. So what a surprise. Well, they've proven that in the past. The problem with Hillary Clinton, though, is there's all the flashback to all of the ethical problems, all of the lying, all of the deceit, all of the scandals that dog the Clintons. And I think that for a lot of Democrats, they got to be thinking, okay, are we going to go through this for the next 18 months? They are bringing all of this. Just in case you'd forgotten why we have the term Clintonian.
Well, what really gives me a lot of anxiety as a Democrat is we're one scandal away from not having any nominee.
Well, because you don't have a bench.
Look, Petraeus pled guilty to bringing classified documents home to his house that he wasn't supposed to have. Do you think she had classified documents on her server inside her house? I would bet on it. But here's the difference, and here's why the scandal is going to stick. Because it's not the 1990s anymore. There are different avenues for the information to get out. More importantly, she's going to be done in by the Democrats who don't want her to be the nominee.
Well, I was just going to say that before our newest Secretary of State, secretaries of state use private emails, not to the extent of her, and that's where the problem comes in. The other problem comes in because she bashed Bush for using a secret email system. So you put those two together, and that's a problem.
It is not just an email thing. It is that the Clintons do think that they're above the law. They do think that they can get away with stuff in the past because they have. Unfortunately, that pattern is pretty well known now. Now, you may not want to hear it, but we'll hand out some unsolicited advice anyway. Let's start with you, Dan Adams.
If you're interested in architecture, art, or local history, take a trip to Villa Terrace Museum on Milwaukee's East Side, where a new exhibit featuring salvaged relics from torn-down mansions that have been saved by the city's housing authority will be displayed. Very cool stuff.
Michelle Litchens.
To the Board of Regents, do not continue to perpetuate the status quo of education. Serving universities or allowing them to keep tenure, among other things, proves to the taxpayers that you are more concerned with protecting bureaucracies than instead of training Wisconsinites for a career.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my advice is to the growing number of American parents who are giving their toddlers coffee drinks every day. Coffee is for grown-ups. Toddlers who drink caffeinated beverages can get addicted to caffeine. They have higher rates of diabetes, depression, and substance abuse, and 3 times the risk of childhood obesity.
Brian Fraley.
Thank you, Michelle Obama. Long is the list of people who have mocked or belittled our Lieutenant Governor, Rebecca Clayfish. Hate to break it to you folks, but the odds are she and her team will be crafting the next state budget, so you better wise up.
Well, activists are outraged that budget cuts have led the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point to shut down its women and gender studies courses, as Michelle mentioned. My advice is, hey, you should realize that most people will think that's a good thing. Next on Sunday Inside, Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to Congress, a powerful warning or a campaign stunt. An historic speech, a rousing welcome, and a powerful warning. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to a joint session of Congress last week, warning of the dangers of a deal that he says will allow Iran to get a nuclear bomb. Not in attendance, Madison area Congressman Mark Pocan and Milwaukee Congresswoman Gwen Moore. Gwen Moore lashed out that Netanyahu's speech was a campaign stunt and accused the Israeli Prime Minister's speech of being reckless and disgraceful. So, Linda Bruin, should she actually have gone to hear it?
Well, yeah. There were things in Netanyahu's speech that I thought went a little too far. And frankly, the Israeli people, by the Israeli polls, thought it was more of a campaign speech. You know, he's got a re-election campaign in March 17th, and he's actually a couple points behind in the polls. But even if it was part campaign stunt for Israel's re-election. It also was a warning that this very conservative, hawkish prime minister believes in. And so I think she should have come to hear it. I agree that some of the way it was originated was an insult to the president. I can understand why the president chose not to meet with Netanyahu, to let that be said. But on the other hand, I think that it behooved the Democratic Party to send a message that despite strong differences, we are all going to show Israel respect.
Michelle Lichens.
This is an embarrassment.
Yep.
It was an embarrassment around the world that some Democrats said that this was political and therefore they were not going to see the Prime Minister of Israel address America's Congress. Netanyahu had to do this because his country is a bomb's throw away from another country that's going to have a nuclear weapon in the near future.
I was actually shocked. I didn't know what to expect. I thought it was a very moving speech. I thought it was a very powerful speech, and I thought that the contrast between the eloquence of his speech and some of the attacks just made the critics seem petty and pathetic, whether or not you agreed with everything he had to say. Dan Adams, what do you think?
Well, I agree with Lynn. While I think that he may have been somewhat disrespectful to come without the blessing of Obama, they should have just gone to avoid the story that we're talking about right now. But let's be clear, there's bipartisan support for the state of Israel. There's not bipartisan support for the Likud party, which in the last election in Israel only got 23% of the vote. And
yeah, but is there bipartisan support for a deal that will make one of the leading sponsors of terrorism in the world a nuclear power? And you know, Nancy Pelosi said afterwards she was moved to tears. I think she was moved to tears because this warning was so powerful, because it really raised the question, are we doing the right thing? Are we about to reward this terrorist state with a nuclear bomb? I mean, this is a big issue. We often debate, you know, little small stuff, but Netanyahu, I mean, it did feel like a Churchillian moment.
It's not the first time Gwen Moore has embarrassed Milwaukee, and it won't be the last. And, you know, you're right. President Obama has good reason to be upset that Netanyahu, the prime minister, came to speak here, because his team, Obama's team, is working so hard on behalf of his opponent. So it's actually the Obama administration that has involved themselves in that election, not the Republicans who invited an ally to come to speak about a looming state sponsor of terrorism who might get a nuclear weapon because of this administration.
Yeah, okay, now what is it you don't get this week? Let's go around the table. We'll start with you, Dan Adams.
There's been a lot of talk about freedom this week in Madison. How about discussing the freedom of nonviolent marijuana offenders? Every day in this state, someone is sent to prison for pot. I don't get it.
Michelle Lichens.
What I don't get is how the Journal-Sentinel could be so obsessed with Scott Walker's aide using a Gmail account while he was county executive, but Hillary Clinton setting up her own server and foregoing a government email as Secretary of State is no big deal.
Linda Bruin.
Well, what I don't get is why it took Republican congressmen so long to vote for a clean Homeland Security bill without any of the immigration concessions that they had demanded for months. The Republicans knew they never had a viable alternative, and their vehement public demands only made them look more inept in defeat.
Brian Fraley.
What I don't get is why the left thinks Russ Feingold shed his baggage in Africa when he added Obama foreign policy minion to his list of already rejected credentials.
Well, what I don't get is why anybody is surprised that Hillary Clinton is caught up in yet another scandal. She's a Clinton, people. Get used to it. This is what the next 18 months is going to be like, over and over and over again. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and the losers of the week. First, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Dan Adams, you're first again.
My loser this week, the Walton Family Foundation, for deciding to pull back from funding reform of Milwaukee's education system. Milwaukee's education situation needs more help, not less. My winners, the parents, teachers, and school leaders across Milwaukee who are committed to continuing the fight for quality education across the city. As Dr. Howard Fuller says, no struggle, no progress. Both struggle and progress will continue.
Michelle Lichens.
The winners this week are the members of the Wisconsin State Assembly who sat on the assembly floor for 24 hours and listened to Democrats and bystanders belittle and heckle them so that workers could have the freedom to join or not join a union in Wisconsin. I wish I could have been there to vote with you. My losers are the MPS board, who voted to waste $10 million to renovate Malcolm X School, which will leave another school empty. They obviously don't care at all about educating the youth in Milwaukee, or they wouldn't be wasting $10 million. The children of Milwaukee deserve better.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my winners are the more than 300 current and former Republican congressmen, governors, and large city mayors who filed a friend of the court brief at the Supreme Court last Thursday in support of same-sex marriage. marriage. The brief says that same-sex marriage bans are inconsistent with the conservative belief in the limited role of government. My loser is GOP presidential hopeful Dr. Ben Carson, who argued against modern science when he proclaimed that homosexuality is absolutely a choice and cited the sexual behaviors of prison inmates as his proof. His follow-up non-apology only made things worse.
Brian Fraley.
My loser this week is State Senator Julie Lassa. Only hours after complaining about majority Republicans not listening to the opposition, she purges and bans a respectful conservative, Nick Nelson of the Morning Martini blog, from her social media account. She can dish it out, but she can't take it. My winners this week, conservatives. I know things haven't happened as quickly or as seamlessly as we've liked, but if you take a step back and you realize we're in the middle of an incredible conservative transformation of state government. No time for a victory lap, but we should appreciate the wins along the way.
Well, winner, worker freedom in Wisconsin. From now on, if unions want workers to join, they have to convince them, not force them. Workers get the freedom to choose. Loser, organized labor. Cue the sad vuvuzelas. They didn't lose the vote last week. They also lost the argument. When it came down to it, unions could not make the case against voluntary unionism, and it's a movement that looked like it was out of ideas and out of gas. Thanks for joining us. Join me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.